The only item on the agenda today is a hearing on HB 2471. And with that, we'll go ahead and open the hearing and get a briefing on what the bill does from Revisor Reimer. Oh, before we get started, I'm sorry.
Thank you,
Representative Poskin.
Clearly, it's Poskin's personal point of privilege day. Say that 3 times fast. Committee, I would just like to introduce my page, Clara Barnard, who is a sophomore at Blue Valley North. Thank you so much. You want to have to stand up? Thank you.
Oh, welcome. And Representative, thanks for reminding me. So, okay, now we'll start the hearing on HB 2471 and we'll get an overview from Revisor Reimer.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2471 is a new economic development program proposed by the Department of Commerce. The official name is the Transformation of Passenger and Freight Vehicle Industry Act. This was a bill that was introduced last spring. There's also a companion Senate Bill 325, and there was a hearing on that bill last spring. Since this is from last year, just before I forget, I'll just mention that there will need to be technical changes to the dates and that kind of thing. And also to the amendatory section here, we'll need 793606 will need to be replaced because there were changes in that statute last year. So this program is designed to attract businesses producing electric motor vehicles and hydrogen-powered vehicles, or manufacturers of batteries, or research and development of manufacturing of batteries or the vehicles mentioned, or the headquarters of a company that manufactures electric motor vehicles, hydrogen-powered vehicles, or batteries. And in addition, the definition of qualified company, which is used in this bill, also includes the national corporate headquarters of any industry, and also a supplier is included in that definition if you want to take a look at that. So there are a number of incentives that are provided pursuant to this bill. A company does have to meet some criteria. The potential incentives include a tax credit, a percentage of total payroll, sort of like peak, a reimbursement of a percentage of eligible employee training and education expenses, a sales tax exemption for construction. The qualified company, as I mentioned, has to meet some criteria. One is that they have to agree to complete the project described in their application within 5 years of the date as specified in the agreement with the Secretary of Commerce. All companies have to hire that would qualify for any kind of benefit, have to hire a minimum of 250 new employees within 5 years from the date specified in the agreement with the Secretary. And they have to retain those new employees as specified in that agreement. In the case specifically of a qualified company that is going to construct a qualified business facility for the purpose of electric or hydrogen motor vehicle assembly operations, there is a minimum investment requirement of $250 million, and that must be invested within 5 years of the date as specified in the agreement. There is also a sunset provision in this bill. If you turn to page 7, and I'm going through section 2 of the bill, page 7, the sunset currently is December 31, 2026. So I guess one issue is whether, since we're a year later, we need to change that. There are clawback provisions throughout the bill. Some of them are based on whether the company manages to hire and retain at least 90% of those 250 new employees. And also provisions throughout the bill pertaining to certification by the Secretary of Commerce to the Secretary of Revenue that the company is meeting its obligations under the agreement and continues to qualify for incentives. Turning to page 9 of the bill, section 3 discusses the tax credit. This credit is set up as a percentage of the amount of investment in each taxable year. Now, it's up to 10% if the qualified businesses facility is in a county that is a metropolitan county, and those that's defined in the bill. Those are, of course, the major counties. So it's up to 10%, as the secretary may decide for those counties, but it is specified at 10% with respect to facility in a non-metropolitan county. The way it works is the percentage is based on the investment for that particular taxable year, but it's not claimed until the next taxable year, and it's divvied up. The portion of the investment is credited in installments of at least 5 taxable years, and you can see that on page 9, the middle of the page. That's described there. There's also a provision that this could be refundable if, for a particular taxable year, if the amount of the credit is more than the qualified company's tax liability, but it's only for that taxable year, so you can't get a refund for more than one taxable year, and that's at the top of page 10. Section 4 discusses the payroll withholding tax incentive. That's at sort of the bottom of page 10. This incentive is up to 100%, as determined by the secretary, of the qualified company's Kansas payroll withholding taxes. There is a requirement that the qualified company has to maintain a median wage or average wage paid to new employees that is equal to or greater than 120% of the county median wage throughout the term of the agreement with the secretary. This incentive is available for up to 10 successive taxable years, again, and that's determined by the secretary. So there's a significant amount of discretion in this bill with respect to how the Secretary of Commerce can shape an agreement under this incentive program. As part of this particular incentive, there's also a kind of a delay provision that provides that you can delay the commencement of this incentive, but there's a limit of 3 years on that, and that's at the top of page 11. The agreement with the secretary is to set forth a percentage of payroll withholding taxes that may be retained each year, and also any requirements or performance targets to receive that benefit. Again, we've got a clawback provision on page 11. If the qualified company fails to hire or retain minimum of 90% of the number of new employees, then there's a clawback of a portion of the incentive. On page 12 of the bill, we have the incentive pertaining to training and education, reimbursement for certain expenses. And with respect to this particular incentive, it is useful to look at the definition of training and education in the bill. And if you do so, I can find it here, you'll see that on page 5, means the amount actually paid for training and education of the group of employees or a portion thereof at any Kansas community college or technical college, and from which the qualified company expects to derive increased productivity. So there is that specific reference to Kansas community colleges or technical colleges. And then underneath that, there's also a definition for training and education eligible expense, and that, is a list of what types of expenses would be eligible for reimbursement. One of the requirements of this incentive is that it's limited to new employees that establish residency in Kansas at by the completion of the training or education program and are employed at a qualified business facility of a qualified company that is located and operating in Kansas. And there's, again, a provision that the qualified company has to actually demonstrate that the trainee has established Kansas residency by the completion date of their training. And there has to be certification of that by the secretary before this incentive is provided. Section 6 is just a fund for that training and education reimbursement provision. Section 7 provides a sales tax exemption for construction of the qualified business facility, and that is goes on until it's completed or until a date specified for completion of the qualified business facility in the agreement. And again, there is that 5-year provision with respect to the investment. Section 8 on page 14 is a report provision by the Secretary of Commerce. And there are a number of items listed on that page that the Secretary needs to report to the Governor, the Senate Standing Committees on Assessment and Taxation and Commerce, and the House of Representatives Standing Committees on Taxation and Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development. Section 9 is just 793606, which is amended for purposes of that construction sales tax exemption. And that is what the bill does.
Okay, thank you, sir. I have a few questions, but I'll open it for questions and I'll go last. Any questions for the reviser on this?
Yeah.
Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of going through this, is there a cap set on this, on how many companies we can do this for? Because I didn't really notice any cap, whether or not one company, 2 companies, a dozen companies, 30 companies. I mean, is there a cap on that anywhere in there?
No.
Okay.
There is a sunset, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
And there is actually a specific reference that the qualified companies can apply jointly.
Right.
So there can be more than 2, but there's no limit on the number of companies or anything.
So,
like that.
I mean, other than the window, it could be any number.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Osman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I understand the bill correctly, it is applicable to anybody, any company that is willing to hire an additional 250 employees and has at least a $250 million investment in specific areas as outlined in the bill.
So the 250 million, basically, yes, the 250 million investment only applies to companies that are going to manufacture hydrogen-powered vehicles or electric-powered vehicles.
Do we know at this point are there any companies currently in Kansas that this would apply to, or do we know how far-reaching this type of a tax incentive would even be to companies in America?
I do not know, but I'm guessing that perhaps some of the conferees would.
Okay. One other question, if I can. So you said that the application process sunsets after 3 years, but the tax incentives for any company that fits within that incentive, or it sunsets at 2026. We might change that. But the tax incentive, once a company gets in, is applicable for up to 10 years. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so. Let me make sure that I've got, with respect to the income tax credit specifically. So the total qualified investment has to be completed within 5 years. And then actually it's kind of open-ended. So it's broken up into installments, and then those installments shall be claimed in each of the next successive taxable years for not less than a total of 5 taxable years, as determined by the Secretary with respect to each portion or installment. So it kind of stretches it out.
Are you aware of any other types of incentives where there automatically is a sunset provision in there, but people that are within that can still utilize that that benefit well outside the sunset time period?
You know, I'd have to go back and look, but it's possible that Apex was set up that way. I'd have to check that.
All right, thank you.
So the sunset is specifically for the qualification. The rest of it stays in place until it's earned out.
So the sunset is specifically with respect to entering into an agreement.
Okay, perfect. And then you said jointly that companies could apply jointly. Does that mean that you could have two companies that are both under $250,000 or $250 million in investment, but they put themselves together? Would they then qualify if they were over 250 million combined?
I think that is sort of the intent, but I'd have to look at the language a little bit closer to make sure about that.
It's all right. You can get back to us later on
Okay.
that. So we'll move on to Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not sure, Charles, did you have a hand in the fiscal note on this? Is that something you can answer to, or should I?
No, I really can't speak to that, but thank you for reminding me that there is one. Yeah.
Well, sort of. I was reading it. There's sort of a fiscal note. There's a lot of question marks. So that's, I'll save it for another person. Thank you.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Charles. Just a quick question. Representative Osmond was asking a line of question that I was actually going to ask as well. So in the interest of time, do we have anything else, to your knowledge, on the books in Kansas, whereby we pass out $250 million for 250 jobs?
Again, probably the incentive program that immediately comes to mind of that scale would be Apex.
What was the what were the number of jobs that we were looking at for Apex?
I'd have to look.
I think it was Mr. Chairman, I don't know if it was 250. Was it?
There were no number of job requirements in the Apex bill. However, the Apex, the award was given to a company that promised 4,000 jobs.
I thought it was in the thousands. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Representative Dotson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We read page 11 there on 90% and so on. So there's a penalty if you don't meet your job creation percentage. Is there any clawback available or necessary if they're going out of business? In other words, if the business fails, have we invested something that we ought to be drawing back if the business just plain fails?
So there's nothing that provides an exception for a failing business. As I read, the general clawback provisions, it's, if you don't maintain those employees, then then there's a clawback. If you don't make the required investment, then there's a clawback. But, so as a practical matter, I guess if the, company is bankrupt and, you're not going to, that would be a question. But I don't see any specific exception for, a situation where a company goes out of business.
I've got just one question. This is kind of out of curiosity, but on the bottom of page 14, there's a lot of exemptions for kind of strange stuff. Cigarettes, alcohol, milk.
Yeah, that is the current statute, and you are correct. There are 40 or 50 pages of exemptions.
Okay, thank you.
So, sir, in regards to the clawback that he asked about, supposing a company ceases to do business or doesn't hit their number and they are like 2/5 of the way in through the payment. So if they qualify for a tax credit and that's paid over equal payments over 5 years or more, do the payments stop to them if they don't hit their numbers, or do we still owe them the tax credit?
Yeah, there's um, Chairman, there's a certification provision on page 10, sort of in the middle of the page there in subsection C. So there has to be a certification by the Secretary of Commerce that the company continues to meet the requirements of the Act. And the language is there on line 16 is no credit shall be issued by the Secretary of Revenue unless a qualified company or qualified companies has been certified by the Secretary of Commerce as eligible as provided by Section 2 for each taxable year that the credit is claimed.
Okay. All right. Thanks for clearing that up. Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Charles, I know it feels like we're picking on you, but we're really not. But I'm getting kind of lost and kind of confused. I'm looking at the payroll tax rebates. You're talking about sales tax exemptions, investment tax credits, training reimbursements. Now, in one of those, you said they were refundable. Can you touch base on that again? Which one of these is a refundable tax credit?
Yes, Representative. So the investment tax credit there is a refundability provision for that. And you can see that on the top of page 10 in subsection B. So it is somewhat limited. It's kind of set by the Secretary in the agreement, the percentage of the tax credit that may be refundable when claimed. And then, there's a provision that's limited. It can't, any excess credit cannot be refundable after the taxable year period that the credit may be claimed.
Are you saying that the Secretary determines what that credit will be?
Yes.
And is there a magic formula, or just, any idea on how that would be processed? The checks and balances involved in determining the amount of credit and from the Secretary?
So basically, it would be up to the Secretary's discretion in kind of forming the deal. And of course, there is a limitation, the 10%, right? Either up to 10%, but of the investment,
In regards to the payroll tax, and if it's 100%, do they get to keep the payroll tax that they collect, or is it based off of what the individual ends up owing after credits and deductions?
So to answer that question, it probably would be useful to turn to the definitions. And where is that here? Where it does discuss. Well, I thought there was something that pertained to that in definitions, but I'm not seeing it now. So looking at section 4 on pages 10 and 11 there. So again, there's that I'm not sure if this goes to your question, but again, there is a certification provision there. um, on the bottom of page 11. And so there is that limitation. So if the Secretary, if the Secretary of Commerce would not certify to the Secretary of Revenue that the qualified company is eligible, then, then the payroll withholding taxes would not be provided. That it appears to be the way that's structured there at the bottom of page 11.
Okay, well, we'll get some more detail on that at a later date. Thank you. Yeah, so. Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Charles, on section 4, the withholding, the 120% of the average income that's county based,
Yes.
and is that provision specific only to the withholding tax provision? Could a company, if they didn't pay 120% of the median county wage, they could still qualify for everything else, just not the withholding portion, correct?
Correct. It's only specific to the withholding.
Okay. And there's no restriction on the 120% on that's top to bottom. That's from the lowest paid employee to the highest paid employee.
Yeah, there's no further specificity about how that's supposed to be figured.
Okay.
Just as, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a requirement that they live and work in Kansas, or if they had somebody on the company payroll that was in another country or lived in Mississippi, another state, do they still get to collect the income tax there?
So section 4, the payroll withholding tax benefit applies to qualified companies' employees. And that is a defined term, which you can find on page 3, paragraph 17. So it means you're employed at a qualified business facility project site, full-time, scheduled to work an average minimum of 30 hours per week, employed for at least 3 consecutive months on the last day of the period covered by the Department of Labor's quarterly wage report and unemployment tax return. So that's a little bit different than the education and training investment, which applies to new employees, which is a different definition. Did that answer your question? Maybe not.
I think it did.
So I guess the answer is actually, no. I mean, there's nothing specific other than, it'd be with Kansas withholding from that employee. So,
okay. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you again, Charles, for standing up for questions. I was looking through, I think my thing says it's 52 pages. I don't know if your version is that. I was looking through the 52 pages and I was trying to find in here, since we've heard recently about some disparities in how things are done in Kansas. Are there any, to your knowledge, any language in here where they have set-asides for small business, small minority-owned businesses, be it on the basis of race or gender? Is that included in the bill?
in this bill, no.
Is that the qualified, when I was looking on page 7, is that the qualified companies or?
No, qualified companies are defined in the definition section on page 4.
Okay, so on that definitions in there, do they have any set-asides for minority-owned businesses with this particular industry that they want to get started up?
No, there's no specific provision based on those criteria.
Basis on criteria of race or gender. Okay, well, okay. 52 pages. Thanks, sir.
Oh, within 793606, if you're talking about the whole statute, I'd have to look through that.
No, sir, I
there
was just
may
referring
be
to 2471.
Oh, okay, right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Charles, is there any requirement here that they use this program only, or can they also participate in other incentive programs?
I don't recall any specific limitation, no.
And if somebody was using Apex, could they also use this program, or are they precluded from doing so in the Apex bill?
I believe they're precluded in the Apex bill.
And there's nothing in this bill that supersedes that. Okay. And it's for new facilities or existing facilities that make a $250 million investment.
With respect to the electric powered or hydrogen powered vehicles.
So like if there's a GM plant and they wanted to go into electric vehicles in the state of Kansas and made an investment, they would qualify.
Well, there is a limitation on facility. The definition of facility, I think, would probably preclude that. And I'm looking at pages 2 and 3 of the bill. So there's a provision that if the facility was acquired or leased from another company, that it was not used, similarly. But I don't think it's specifically, I guess it doesn't specifically indicate, I'd have to look at it more carefully, but I don't see that there's a specific prohibition about somebody, an entity like GM, deciding to take advantage of this.
Well, if they made a $250 million investment or more in an expansion, I would think that would qualify, right? Okay. Committee, any other questions? Thank you, sir. You did a great job. Okay, we'll move on to the proponent testimony. In person, Bob North, Chief Legal Counsel, Kansas Department of Commerce. Welcome back to Commerce Committee, sir.
Good. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today in support of 2471. Kansas is poised right now to take advantage of the estimated over $1 trillion that is going to be invested into EV and hydrogen powered vehicles over the next 6 or 7 years. And all of the major auto manufacturers in the U.S. are investing heavily in the EV space. As you can see in the testimony, and I'm not going to go through all of that, but there are tens and tens of billions of dollars of investment and jobs, and this is the time for Kansas to create this new tool, which is not as robust as the Apex tool, which you approved last session, and which we've used in a very, very beneficial way. And I'll compare this bill to Apex a little bit later. But the point being, this is a unique opportunity that faces us, and we would really, really appreciate your support for 2471. This bill is, let's say, it's less robust than the Apex bill in several ways. So on the payroll rebate side, which Charles discussed with you, rather than 10% of company-wide payroll, which was the Apex benefit, this is limited to the withholding tax associated with that payroll. So it's comparable to our PEAK program, which we've had on the books for a dozen years or so. Peak allows a company to retain or get a refund of up to 95% of the withholding tax associated with eligible employees. And eligible employees in Peak are those that are paid above the county median. Under this bill, we go beyond that, and it's 120%. So pretty significant difference there. You know, for an example, if a company had a payroll of $1 million, and under the Apex bill, they could receive 10% of that as a payroll rebate, which would be $100,000. Under this bill, that same $1 million payroll would get you roughly a $40,000 benefit. So it's significantly lesser in terms of the richness of the incentives in that way. So going back, company has to create 250 new jobs within 5 years. So Mr. Chair, to your question about whether this could be applicable to a facility that's already in existence, I think the answer is yes, if they were going to hire 250 new jobs and if they were going to make that commensurate investment. So if an existing automobile manufacturer added an EV line or a hydrogen powered line and was going to make that investment and going to hire those jobs, then that company would be eligible for benefits under this act. As we talked about, or as Charles indicated, on the payroll rebate side, it's 120% of the county, and for EV manufacturing and the hydrogen $250 million capital investment. Again, if you compare it to Apex was for a minimum of $1 billion. So quite a significant difference when you're comparing capital investment between the two bills. Companies also got to commit to completing that project within 5 years, which, if you've been by the Panasonic plant, for example, you know, they've made tremendous progress, and they're going to be producing batteries there in Q1 of 25. So the 5 years is probably an abundance of caution, because, you know, there's a multitude of reasons for these projects to happen sooner rather than later. You know, one question that comes up a lot of times with these larger incentive bills are, where are the workers going to come from, right? And that's why the training component that is in 2471 is important, because it will train our young people. It will train people coming out of high school. It will train people that maybe they've got an associate's degree. So we feel like that's an important component of the bill, is the dollars that are available to help train workers for these facilities. Again, the training is limited to $5 million a project. So the payroll tax, yes, we've spoken about it a little bit, but up to 100% of the qualified employees withholding tax, not the overall payroll, but it's limited to the withholding tax. There's a tax credit up to 10% of qualified eligible capital investment that would be earned, and then the company could not claim that tax credit any quicker than 5 years. It's a minimum of 5 years, and the department has discretion to tell a company, okay, you're gonna claim that credit over 10 years, right? To kind of alleviate some of the immediate fiscal impact. And that's the tax credit's important. The refundability is important, because many new companies, they're not going to be profitable right away. So giving them a tax credit that is not refundable is not a true economic benefit to them. So the refundability part of this is very important to getting companies that, it's going to take several years for them to ramp up. The tax credit benefit, again, is slightly less robust than under Apex. This is capped at 10 years, whereas Apex, with the consent of the State Finance Council, there could be it could go beyond that 10%. The other benefit is the sales tax exemption on the construction materials. Again, that's common with our HBIP program. Some projects issue IRBs to take advantage of that sales tax exemption. So there's a number of ways to get to that same point. In the testimony, there's a chart that kind of compares HB 2471 to Apex and to our traditional benefits. And I think if you look at that, you're going to see that 2471 is somewhere in between traditional incentives and Apex. Clawbacks are really, really important. It's also important to note that benefits are not paid under 2471 until a company has created the jobs and until a company has made the capital investment. We do not advance any incentives or payments to the company until the company has performed. And if a company fails to reach at least 90% of its committed capital investment, or if the project is abandoned, I guess to the point of a question we had earlier, if a company's 2 years into their project and doesn't complete the project, then we are going to claw back 100% of the incentives the company has received, and of course we will discontinue any future incentives. If employment drops below 90% of the committed jobs, then we are going to claw back a proportionate amount that reflects the shortfall. So to give you an example, if you promise 500 jobs and you only get to 400, we are going to collect or claw back 20% of the award that you would have received for those employees. So we feel like 2471 really positions the state well to take advantage of these billions and billions of dollars of EV investment and hydrogen vehicle investment. It lets us leverage what we did with the Apex legislation. It lets us build on the foundation that we've got with Panasonic and hopefully others, and we encourage your support. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to open it up here for questions for you. Thanks for, and especially thanks for that graph. I think that's going to come in handy. On the payroll tax, my question earlier was about withholding. You did say it was limited to withholding, but what if the individual employee gets a tax refund or whatever? Does that affect what the company keeps, or do they just keep everything that they withhold?
I think the company keeps everything that it withholds, but if you'll note that the bill gives both the Department of Revenue as well as the Department of Commerce the ability to, I don't know about the word audit, but to inspect. They've got to maintain records, so there will be an opportunity for the state to ensure that the proper amount of withholding is being reported.
Okay, thank you. Representative Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is probably almost certainly a question for Charles, and I don't think that he'll be able to answer it now. But I just want to make sure that we're actually even allowed to give out tax incentives under the ESG law that we passed last year. If we say that hydrogen is a natural resource, this is HB 2100. If we say that hydrogen is a natural resource and that this bill uses or making hydrogen batteries utilizes hydrogen, which it does, then the state cannot give preference based on the ESG law based on that. So I just want to make sure that we're even allowed to do this under the ESG law.
Congratulations, Representative Shu. You just killed the bill. We'll leave that up to Representative Williams. Representative Christy Williams.
Yeah, why give preference? Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair. So there are 4 different parts or 4 different incentive parts for this. Is that correct?
Correct.
Correct. And so currently we have incentives that really touch every single part. Currently, a business can layer these different parts, except this elevates it a little bit more. Would that be accurate? So, for example, Peak has the 95%. This is 100%. But you could, the current incentives we have can be layered similarly to make it look just like this. Is that correct?
So let me kind of reframe that. So you could not use both traditional incentives and these incentives. A big distinction between HPIP, for example, and 2471 is the refundability aspect of it, right? I mean, under HPIP, you can transfer up to 50% of the credits that you've earned, but they are not refundable. And so we've found that if you're not a for-profit, if you're not profitable yet, then having tax credits is of really limited utility to you. So the refundability part of this is important and truly distinguishes 2471 from our current incentives.
So setting aside the refundability aspect of it, a current business could partake of the layering of, let's say, HPIP, Peak, KIT, etc. Yes or no?
It's not uncommon at all for a
Yeah.
company to utilize multiple incentive programs.
Right. So I guess my question is, now that we're looking at a brand new incentive that's very involved, that allows a whole lot of secretary control and decision making on the credits that are allowed to move forward and that are refundable. My question is that you came to legislative post audit in January, and we asked questions, and I'm gonna give you just 2 of the questions. One you responded to, one you did not respond to. So listen to these questions that we asked and then apply it to this bill. And please explain, if you couldn't answer the questions related to other incentive programs, how is Commerce going to manage this and transparently provide back the data? So the first question was about Peak. It says, what percentage of reported new jobs are actually new versus just shifted from one company to another within Kansas? Because that's a concern. Does this create competition, or are we drawing new employees from out of state? Because we know that Kansas net, we're number 8 for net migration outward. All the, California, New Jersey, and Illinois, all of them are higher than Kansas, but we're the only red state minus North Dakota, because it's cold, that has the most migrating people outward. And we have a 2.8 or 2.4% unemployment rate. So where are we getting these people? They're not moving net in, and we don't have a lot of people available for work. So it was really confusing. But anyway, I want to share it with the committee because it's relevant to this bill. The response back from Commerce was, to that question, it was tracking or counting the number of people shifting from a previous job. I mean, they're filing income tax, so we know who they are, to a new job where the employer is earning a benefit is not doable. It wasn't doable. So we couldn't track that. And then the other question that we asked that we received no response that I'm aware of is, for the top programs, can you provide us a list of the or of the total amount of incentives in dollars annually, and how many credits were taken, that were claimed. And we didn't get either. And we're now almost in March. So my question is on those 2 points, not doable, no response. How are you going to track something as massive of this? How, if we don't get the answers to much smaller programs?
Yeah,
Thank you.
appreciate those questions. So to your first kind of question, I guess, about the ability to track a new employee at a company and try to figure out where they worked previously. We've had discussions with the Kansas Department of Labor where companies, they file their wage reports and list their employees. So we're looking at that because I see some utility to knowing that. And but right now, underneath current data collection, I mean, if you've got, say your company has 2,000 people, it's going to be a really monumental task every time you hire someone to find out where that person filed a tax return the previous year. Can we keep working on it and try to find a way that helps? Yes. And do we want new workers into Kansas, new residents into Kansas? Yes. And that goes to some of this training money. And to take advantage of the training money, you're going to end up being a resident of the state of Kansas. So that's a good point as to the kind of cumulative spend on incentives. My understanding is we will have that in the next few days. So this is Thursday, let's say by the first part of next week. Yeah, our economist is working on that, hopefully, as we speak.
Okay, just like one more comment, if I may. It's kind of crazy to me thinking that the Department of Commerce needs economists to tell us how much we're spending. I was just trying to add them up from annual reports, and I got part way, but it wasn't fully conclusive. But bottom line is that I think the majority of us that have businesses or can relate to them understand that there's a shift happening when we give incentives to a business and then they are able to pay more than the person that did not receive incentives. They will shift. And you don't necessarily have to know where they're coming from. You just have to know, were they a Kansas filer or not? And were they paying income tax? That would not be a hugely difficult thing. But I am very concerned that all we're doing is definitely shifting employment from one place in Kansas to another place in Kansas. And for that shift, we pay for it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's true. I guess my only comment would be that a better paying job provides upward mobility to our citizens. And then if I go take a job that pays $5 an hour more, then my employer's got to fill in behind me. And hopefully the employee that moves in behind me is going to find some economic upward mobility as well. So I agree to your point. We need, more workers in Kansas. We're willing to train them. We're asking for some money to help train new workers. But it lifts everybody, right? I mean, it provides upward mobility. So and we think that's important.
Representative Probst.
Thank you. To the point of Kansas having more net out-migration, there's a lot of other things besides income we could talk about on how to encourage people to move to the state. And I'd be happy to have any of those conversations. Bob, the fiscal note, can you speak to that?
Not specifically. I believe it's in the fives to tens of millions the first couple years. We may have somebody that could speak to it more closely, but I don't recall that right offhand.
Okay.
It's going to take, right? These projects take several years to build, and until the construction's done and until the employees are hired, they're not going to take down any benefits. So the kind of the runway to getting benefits under this program would be several years out.
but we don't have, I mean, and there may be somebody later on that can talk to this, but we don't have like, it's kind of laying out, the fiscal note kind of lays out a bunch of scenarios, but we don't have like a hard number that says this is how much we can anticipate it would cost.
Right. It all depends on the rate of progress on the project. How quickly do they build? How quickly do they hire people? And so those are assumptions for sure.
Okay, thank you.
It's also going to matter how many they give away. I mean, how many are you planning on doing each year on these?
Of these, I mean, I know we've got discussions with a handful of companies, probably less than 5 that would fit underneath the parameters of this act. So it's not, there aren't dozens and dozens of companies that would fit into this space.
And is this specifically to manufacturers of the vehicles, or is also the vehicle components?
It could be vehicle components. It could be assembly as well.
Okay, Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just have a couple of questions. First off, I remember Apex, the position we were in. Are we right now racing against Nebraska or anything like that on a known entity that wanting to take advantage of this plan?
So we are in the midst of discussions with several potential projects that would fit within this space. Yes, and those companies are going to be making decisions on where to locate in the next 12 months, we expect.
All right. All right. My other question really goes to one of the benefits. I see this as really valuable, and I think it's a good thing. The training and education expense reimbursement. Do we have that for other companies, or what other benefits or plans like that do we have for existing companies here in Kansas to boost their workforce?
Right. Good question. We've got the KIT program, Kansas Industrial Training, where we give cash awards to companies to train employees with new skills, or new employees, if you will. We've also got the industrial retraining program, where if you've been making one type of tire, for example, and that line is going out of business, and now you need to shift over to tractor tires, we will give you funds to retrain those workers to be able to accommodate the new skills that are required with that job.
Excellent. Those are also through state technical colleges and community colleges?
Yeah, definitely could be. Yes.
Interesting. All right. Thank you.
While we're on the training aspect, I noticed that we're now paying 100% of the training. In Apex, we paid 50% of the training up to $5 million. Is there a particular reason for the change? Are we not having success training individuals? Are they not taking us up on the offer, or how's that working?
Yeah, I think the existing training is going fine. You'll recall with Apex, that $5 million was per year for 5 years. So it was potentially a $25 million spend on training. Under 2471, it's a one-time $5 million. So the benefits potentially a little richer per individual trained, but it doesn't have the ongoing tail that Apex did, for example.
Representative Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm one to find the gray in a bill. And so my question is on the 250 jobs requirement. 2 scenarios. One, is it if it's a brand new business that's coming here and it's not the extension of GM or anything. So brand new, is it they have to have 250 jobs that are on Indeed, and maybe they aren't filled, but they say we have the ability to do 250, or do they have to physically employ 250 folks?
Yeah, good question. So the company will commit in its agreement with the state of Kansas that it is going to create up, 250 at a minimum. So let's say 300 jobs, and it'll have a ramp up schedule. Those 300 jobs are going to be filled within 3 years for example. If they don't meet that hiring commitment, then the clawbacks that we talked about would potentially kick in. So execution of the agreement is based upon the projection from the company, benefits, and or whether benefits are going to be clawed back. That depends upon actual hiring of new jobs.
Okay, and the second one, and to kind of piggyback off the chair's scenario with GM, that's kind of how I learn better based off scenarios. So say that GM decides to do this and they say we're going to expand and have additional 300 jobs. But could they hypothetically, and would this work, or is there safeguards in here that they, in the end, they are firing current employees and moving them over, saying that, yes, these are these employees?
Yep. So what we would do is, at the time we entered into our agreement with the company, we would establish a baseline employment level. So if you've got 1,000 jobs on the day the agreement starts, then we're only going to start counting at 1,001.
Okay.
So that ensures us that these are truly kind of net new jobs, and you're not moving employees from, one part of the plant to another part of the plant.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't mean this in a negative way, but I just want to make the comparison here. So we ran Apex, we passed Apex, we have an Apex project, we have 2 Apex projects. But then we cut it off, right? No more Apex bills. And the reason for that, obviously, is the cost. We don't know where we're at. It's a lot of money that we're giving away. It's big projects. And a lot of unknowns there still, right? I mean, the project's moving forward, at least one of the projects moving forward. But we still have a second one kind of in the wing waiting to go that we haven't even started yet because we're waiting on some federal issues, right?
Correct.
Well, this just on the surface to me, and I'm not against economic development by no means. We spend a lot of time working on that, but it really just kind of feels in the back of my head. Maybe I'm the only one thinking it. I don't know. And if I'm alone, I apologize, but it just seems like this is kind of a back end door to another Apex bill. I understand it's smaller, but we're talking Apex was $1 billion. This is $250 million. So you get 4 or 5 of these companies. We're there. We have another Apex with all the same unknowns that we're facing currently with our original Apex bill. And it just seems like this is just another way to, since we can't do another Apex right now, it just seems like another way to kind of maybe do another Apex without doing an Apex. But the spending is, so well, actually, we don't know what the spending is. But I mean, can you help me with that just a little bit?
Well, sure. I think you characterized it accurately. This is not Apex, right? I mean, Apex, you've got $1 billion. These projects are 250 million. So you've got that scale down already. I can assure you there are not dozens of these projects, right? That, we are talking with a handful, probably less than 5 prospects that could fit into this space. And again, it takes advantage of that momentum that we captured with Apex and with Panasonic. And given the $1 trillion that's going to be spent in the EV hydrogen space, we feel like this gives us a tool to help get Kansas our share of that.
Representative Penn.
Pull you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, sir, for being here today. I appreciate everything that you bring to the table. Your last comment that there's trillions of dollars that are going to be spent in the EV space. That makes my mouth water. I'm pretty sure all my colleagues as well. I guess the question that I have, though, is as I'm looking at how this is broken down and set up, there's not a whole lot of investment outside of, trillions of dollars with the 250 million that you said that a company must come and bring to bear. But then the state is paying for all of the schooling, right? Is that correct?
For the training
For the training,
associated,
right?
not all of it. No,
It says that it's zero cost at state schools. Is that correct?
Right. So it depends on, I guess, the number of employees that would go through training.
Oh, I'll just
So-
say, because I'm looking at all of the conferees testimony that's in here, and they talk about how the state is going to pay for this. I guess I would like to see private industry, since they're going to be spending trillions on this, to pony up more versus the state having to do it. And then here's what the reason I asked them to call upon me. You made comment that, sir, that we need to find and provide a way for increased economic upward mobility. That rings a bell and strikes a nerve with me. And I'll ask the question I asked of the revisor as I'm looking through this. I don't see in the bill where there are small business impact set-asides for minority-owned businesses. Can you tell me if there are, in your understanding of the 52 pages in front of me, small business set-asides in either, or targets for that matter, for workers, trainees to get some of that good 100% paid for state education that are Black? Is that in there?
I don't believe there's any set aside, as I would understand our use of that term. I think it's hopefully intuitive that when you're going to hire that number of jobs, that's going to happen organically. But to your point, no, I'm not aware of any.
Okay, I did 20 years in the Army, and Mr. Chairman, if you allow me a little bit of latitude, I did 20 years in the Army, and we had this one general, he wrote a book about it as well, General Sullivan. He said, hope is not a method. When you're in the thick of things, hope is not a method. So it being intuitive and hoping that it's going to be organic, that's not right, because you took the time to make out a plan. But I'm pointing out the fact that this plan does not include many Kansans who are Black, who are Hispanic. Is that in there? Who are handicapped or handicapable? Are those in there?
I think it's safe to say there's no
Who are
requirements
veterans? I'm
for
just
who they hire.
wondering, does he have anything in there that says that they're going to target or try to do anything to increase the number of workers in Kansas who can enjoy this boon of our mini apex that we're trying to backdoor? That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Representative Laura Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony today. My brain thinks through a couple of different things. One, I'm not familiar with what the energy demand and need for these facilities are. Have you been in talks, and are we as a state capable of meeting those energy needs for these facilities?
So we have been so far, right? I mean, and part of that is site location, and that's part of the process that businesses, when they're looking at where to build a new facility, so they're going to take those kind of logistical things into consideration. But that's an important point.
Yeah, I know whenever with Panasonic, now even driving on K10 looking over, there are large transmission lines being built out, and in the infrastructure, I think there's important, which then going off of infrastructure, I think, as we're looking at the locations of these different spots where Panasonic is, we're a little bit already overwhelmed with, our schools, and how do we be able to meet the needs from a school district perspective, and even I'm going to throw childcare in there as well. There's a lot of new businesses, even in my district, with a new hospital that has shifts, 24/7, similar to Panasonic. So outside of just even this bill, are there ways that you all are trying to meet those needs from an infrastructure perspective of knowing you're not going to overwhelm these counties or cities moving into these areas?
Absolutely. And again, a really good point. So with Panasonic, for example, the discussions with the local units of government that were going to be affected and impacted by the project, those started well before the project was announced, and once they were awarded the Apex benefits. So, and we have a contract employee whose really sole job is to interface with local units of government and Panasonic to ameliorate some of those concerns that you've got. Childcare is a huge concern. Housing's a huge concern. And so the kind of the ripple impact of a project like a Panasonic, it obviously not limited to DeSoto, it's going to come all the way, west and east. So those are things that we do include in our discussions with prospective companies.
Thank you. Yeah, I just think, as we're looking at these, while we're not talking about thousands of jobs, we're talking about hundreds. We're already at a point, I know, in Johnson County where economic development is needed, but I want to proceed with caution and not trying to do so much at one time and overwhelm infrastructure with childcare schools. So that's just my perspective and hesitancy towards this. Thank you.
Yeah, sustainability is certainly important, and I think we learned a lot from the Panasonic build out. What about citizens? All too often we have new projects that are being presented at the local level, and we have hundreds of constituents that come in and advocate against the project because they're not ready for that type of a change in their community. But then they always end up happening anyway. Is there any way for citizens to say, okay, if enough of them show up or enough of them sign a petition within, say, 10 miles, can a citizenry stop production?
Yeah, certainly with respect to local incentives, a TIF or a transportation development district. Those incentives are local incentives and absolutely taxpayers and citizens located within that area would have, a full say into whether those incentives are offered. And a lot of times on these large projects, you're going to see that. So you're going to see a state incentive package. You're also going to see a local government, local entity incentive package. And so I would characterize the level of input from citizens would be much greater at the local incentive level.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I know that over the last several years, your agency has been, just wanting to increase the amount of the amount of companies coming in, increasing the I guess the footprint of manufacturing and things like that. I'm wondering, of all the organizations or companies that you're looking at, are they every one of them is EV or hydrogen? We're not looking at any other companies.
Yeah, no, not at all. And hope I didn't convey that characterization. We've got approximately 240 projects in our deal pipeline, and by far the majority of those would not be in the EV or hydrogen space.
But the EV and the hydrogen are the only ones that we say, well, we really want you because we're going to give you all these incentives. I mean, so far, every incentive we have given through the Apex or through this has just simply been for this new EV push or hydrogen push or whatever. And it seems like we're just saying, well, if you want to build a manufacturing facility to build a new widget, we don't care if you're going to spend $250,000 or $250 million and employ 300 people. Good luck. We appreciate you coming, but you're not getting any incentives. So I don't understand why you limited this. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter what they're manufacturing. It's the jobs that they're bringing in. So I'm not sure I understand why you accept that that's what is being pushed right now.
Yeah. So let me speak to that a little bit. So the incentives on page 2 of the testimony, the traditional incentives, all of those are available to any company that qualifies. And to your second point, if you're suggesting that this be expanded beyond EV and energy manufacturers and companies, I think that would be a wonderful discussion to have.
Then why didn't you bring it that way?
The focus of this bill is to take advantage of the immediate opportunity for billions of dollars in investment in the EV and hydrogen space.
Because as far as you guys are concerned, that's the only thing being built right now. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Probst, and then that'll be it for you, sir.
this is less of a question for Bob and more of a response. I'm not a huge fan of these sort of incentives, but I do want to, based on your comment, step back a little bit. We can talk about the severance tax we haven't been collecting on oil pipelines forever. I mean, we've been subsidizing industries, legacy power industries forever. So it's not fair to say we never do this for other ones. But the other thing is, we also have to consider the landscape we're in. I mean, whatever we think or don't think about the technology or what's considered new technology, the fact of the matter is the rest of the world is taking advantage of changes in power generation and how we're moving. And America's not, and Kansas isn't. And even though at my core, I don't like this model, I do have to acknowledge that the federal government is pumping tons of money into this infrastructure and into this development. The rest of the world is moving this way. And I think it's less of a omission based on political or any philosophy and more of a trying to acknowledge that the world is moving a certain way and we should at least be poised to capture that.
All right, there are no further questions. Thank you for being a linebacker today. Next up. Deborah Tufel.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Tarwater and committee. My name is Deborah Tufel. I'm the president of the Hutchinson-Reno County Chamber of Commerce, and I felt compelled to come speak today on behalf of our economic development efforts in Hutchinson and Reno County, but also on behalf of economic developers across the state who have supplied written testimony from the KEDA organization. Initially, I wrote written testimony, but I was going to be in Topeka, and I felt like this was an important topic that you deserve to hear from a practitioner in the field of how this impacts us. So I'm here in support of House Bill 2471 because I think it's going to differentiate our state in the sector of the economy that has the opportunity right now to grow, but we have a short window of time to make sure that we stand out as the state of Kansas in this field. We want to compete for every kind of economic development deal, as Representative Hoffman said, but we also want to make sure that we're doing things differently to make Kansas positioned for the future. And while EVs have perhaps struggled in recent years, it is still a technology of the future that we want to get in on the front end of. We got into the space of looking at projects like this, of course, as economic developers when it crossed our plate when the Panasonic search emerged. And those of us that were in the trenches of working economic development said, wow, that would be a project we wish we could have in our community. It didn't go that way for us, but it started us thinking about how we prepare. And so one of the things in my written testimony and that I want to share is how we are preparing for deals of the future like this, so we make sure Kansas can compete, our communities can compete, and that we have the right tools in the toolkit. And this bill is one tool in the toolkit. Community readiness is another piece of it. And so to be ready in Hutchinson, what that means for us is 2 years ago, we started looking at how do we be prepared with sites that can help us compete that are large enough to meet the needs of industry, because at the time Panasonic crossed our desk, we did not have a site of that size. We were very fortunate to be able to private fundraise through one of the divisions that I oversee in our Chamber of Commerce to start the process of developing a site of the future on K96. That site today, we have under our ownership about 250 acres, and ultimately we're working towards the acquisition of 500 acres to have what I would call for us a mega site for future projects like this. That has not been easy, but we also are very appreciative of some of the grants that we have received. One of those was the BASE 2.0 grant to help us prepare for that. We've also at the local level been putting together an infrastructure plan of how to compete. We feel like our site is gaining some traction because over the last year, we began pitching that site for real world projects that Kansas is getting us in front of. And one of those is squarely in this EV supply chain industry. So it is very imminent to us and it's important to us, but I think it's important to every community across Kansas that is trying to compete for deals.
So as we began the process of pitching our site, you're always going to run into competition. And while we emerged as a great site within the state of Kansas, we know there were other states vying for that same investment. And so without the right tools in the toolkit, we stand to either gain or lose based on whether we have competitive tools. And I'm happy to say we got to the finals of a project that could be in this EV industry, but that project currently is on hold. And I think one of the reasons it is on hold is they're evaluating the viability of our state and our location as we try to compete with other states. So, but we won't stop there. You know, that project is on hold, but we have seen our Department of Commerce bringing new projects forward that we're continuing to swing for, and we may miss a few times before we get a hit, but we hope that we are in a position as a state to compete. You're right that there are other tools in the state toolkit, but this one I think would brand Kansas as getting out in front of the EV and hydrogen industry. Hydrogen has some other opportunities within Hutchinson, within the hydrogen industry. Of course, that's an emerging industry in the vehicle industry, but I think there's some promise there too. So, you know, we were on the, as I said, a short list for a very highly recognized EV company that you would all know and want to have in your state. But without a tool like this, we're not in a competitive position to win that. And so it is currently in a delay. I hope it comes back, but hope, as someone said, is not a method. It is not a strategy. And so we can't just hope for these deals to get to come to Kansas. We can't hope to get the attention of companies. We have to put the tools in place to get us there. The things I do like about this bill is that it is targeted. You can look at incentives two ways. Having a very targeted incentive helps differentiate us. If you open it up to the world, you're opening yourself up to offering a lot of incentives and maybe get out in front of your skis. So I do like that this bill is targeted to some industries that are emerging industries, and it's very forward thinking that Kansas is looking this way. I think this would be an industry that would be transformational. Currently, we do not have any industries within Hutchinson, Reno County, or probably in the south central part of the state within this industry. While I love what's happening with Panasonic in the northeast part of the state, the rest of the state deserves to benefit from that industry too. So if you cut it off with the projects that have qualified for Apex, you're cutting off the rest of south central and rural Kansas from being able to benefit. The other thing I like about this bill is it does invest in tech training, and I would love to come back sometime to talk about all the things we're doing within workforce development in our community to try to prepare a workforce of the future. We have a great community college system and a great career and technical education system that I say bar none is the best in the state for educating kids within technical careers. We have a very diverse Reno County economy, one of the most diverse from an industrial perspective within the country. And our community college responds to those technical training needs across the spectrum. But I like that this bill does put dollars into tech training for Kansans. I stood in front of a group of kids when I first came back to Reno County, which was 7 years ago. And the kids in our community want future jobs. But when you sit down with them and you talk about what their future looks like, it's the exact reason, as Representative Williams said, we're shrinking as a state because kids don't see their future here. We have to draw a path forward, future path for them. We have to help them see what those jobs are. And we've implemented a Career Quest program that helps kids see their future. But I think kids want to see a future in the EV industry for Kansas too. The other thing I like about this bill is that it does have clawback provisions. That's very important in every economic development deal, that if companies don't perform, that there's a mechanism to claw those dollars back. And so I encourage you, as you're thinking about the nuances of this bill, that you make sure that you leave those clawback provisions in place. And then, like I said, if we wait, these opportunities are going to pass us by. We know the projects that we're competing with in this EV industry have invested in states like Ohio and Michigan, and Tennessee and Indiana. We were probably competing with Missouri and Oklahoma and Texas, maybe even Nebraska. States are competitive, and we need to be competitive as Kansans. So as an economic developer that I've dedicated 25 years of my career to economic development, and 23 of that is here in Kansas, I've seen how we serve small projects. We have never seen a project of this size in Hutchinson and Reno County, but I hope that we will. I think that we deserve to. We're preparing, as I said, a site that is ready for projects like this. And we would really appreciate your support because time is imminent while we're trying to compete for a project. And I would be happy to answer questions.
Sure. And thanks so much for coming in today. I know you were already here, and I'm glad that you decided to go ahead and be an in-person proponent. I think you did a wonderful job. Jason has been advocating to get you here, and we will get you here sometime in the near future to go through some of the great things you guys are doing.
Thank you.
You mentioned 500,000 acres or
500 acres.
500 acres. I think Panasonic is built on 300 acres, if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is a big site for big plans. And Representative Laura Williams asked some questions earlier about the school districts and whether or not they can withhold, because you're talking about a lot more than 250 employees. That's the minimum for this bill. There'll be thousands of employees probably. So have you thought about supplying power to, because these things are power hungry companies? You thought about the infrastructure for supplying power and then the school districts and how that all is going to work?
We have. So as we've started assembling our site, we started looking at all of those power, natural gas, water and wastewater utilities, as well as the workforce situation in the schools. And I can tell you that we've been working very closely with Evergy on a plan for our site to be able to deliver a sizable amount of power. That plan long-term will work. If forced to build out a new factory in the next year, we could deliver 20 megawatts of power. Some of the projects we're seeing are requiring upwards of 100 megawatts of power. And so Evergy was able to put together a plan to see a path forward to currently 120 megawatts of power, which is a very sizable plant. You could build a 3 million square foot factory and power that with that 120 megawatts. So I think we do have a power plan in place, but I would say I also wrote testimony recently for a bill that Evergy has that would allow them to have the right tax structure to continue to grow capacity. And they are capacity constrained in Kansas. That's no secret. And so in order to be able to compete, we do have to have a sizable amount of power, and we do have a plan for our park. We also have a plan in place with the city of Hutchinson. So our site was annexed into the city in December. It was also rezoned for heavy industrial. And so it has gone through those gates and so that we can make sure we don't get any surprises when a company does want to pull a building permit and then finds that it's not zoned appropriately. Ours is zoned appropriately. And then we also are working with our schools. Unfortunately, population has declined in Hutchinson and Reno County. And because of that, our largest school district has actually been looking at student enrollment declines. And last year, they actually had to close an elementary school. And so do we have capacity? We have a school sitting there that was closed last year that we need to actually fill again. And anyway, so I hope that answers some of your questions.
Yeah, Representative Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. This is mostly just a comment and putting some stuff together that I've been thinking about the last couple weeks. Over the summer, we had a interim on foreign adversary investment. We had kind of a hearing on that a couple weeks ago. And, there was a claim made in the summer that I was a little skeptical on, and still am. But this morning, President Biden also called that Chinese electric vehicles are a security threat to the country. And then Representative Williams asked the question a couple of weeks ago when we had the hearing on how can we make it more secure? And the answer is to onshore this stuff. And so, if China right now is selling EVs for like $12,000, they're just out competing the US on price. And the only answer for us is to produce more EV cars and make them here. And so, I'm skeptical of many of these claims, but if you're not, then part of the answer is building capacity to build EVs here in the United States, and then why not Kansas? So I guess I came into today's hearing a little bit skeptical about the incentives, but if I take a step back and look at the larger picture, I do like the idea of just overall building more of these in the US and less of them in China. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Penn and then Representative Probst will clean up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. And thank you for that question, Representative, because I think that one of the drivers needs to be the demand, which is down in America for EVs. So we just don't push supply if the people don't want them. If they want to have, gas-powered vehicles, give them what they want, what they're willing to pay for. That's market. Good to see you again. This summer, we had an opportunity to come out and see what you guys were doing out in Hutch and Reno, dealing with the leadership of Kansas. A quick question that I wanted to ask you, ma'am. We know that there's like you mentioned, the closure of schools. We're looking at about 6 of those down in Sedgwick County as well. When you talk about the hospitals, when you talk about the housing, and you talk about the childcare, daycare, and the worker piece, can you speak to that? How are you, staged for that? Do you have housing for jobs if they were to come that way? The hospital piece, talk to us about that, please.
Yes, so those are all issues that we have identified. We actually did a citizen engagement survey about 3 years ago, and this was really on the cusp of our city and county determining how to best invest the ARPA dollars that were coming to local governments to make sure we were addressing the things that are true needs, because this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to get some things right. And so I have to applaud our city government and our county government for taking a really close look at housing and childcare as 2 of those very most important basic things. They underpin all of our economic development efforts. If we are not addressing housing and then childcare, and childcare probably is the most important, because if you're attracting folks to your community and you give them a community tour and you can find them a home, if they can't place their child in a childcare center, we're losing them. And so they're looking at Wichita, or they're maybe just not able to relocate to Kansas at all. And so as a community, we are addressing housing. Is it fast enough? Probably not, but we're not going to give up. Actually, our community was the beneficiary of 2 of the moderate income housing grants. So thank you for those programs. Those are making a difference. We also are embarking on a downtown Hutch master plan, and how do we utilize upper floors of buildings that could be repurposed for that very thing of housing. We had a downtown, an older apartment/hotel building that is now under new ownership and was just announced in the last couple of weeks to receive some of that MIH to build 40 new units. We had another housing development on the north side of town that also qualified, that could be planned for multiple hundreds of homes, but I think the first phase of it was 80. And so those are small things. We're also working with SCED and Interfaith Housing on some housing programs to do infill housing development. And just this coming week on a Monday, I'm having a meeting with our school district and a local developer, because one of the programs in our career and tech ed is that we have a construction trades program that builds homes. We want to scale that up even more to give kids real world experience, but also build infill housing. In the childcare realm, there was a study done that said we were several hundred slots short of childcare, but fortunately, through one of the accelerator grants, we are deploying 8 new projects of childcare expansions that will open up 300 childcare slots. I don't want to make all of this work for naught. We have to prepare all of those things, but we also have to make sure then that the jobs follow. And thus, it's all a piece of the layers that you must work on in economic development. But fair questions. Thank you.
Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Deborah, I just wanted to say thanks for coming today and for everything you do in the community.
Thank you all.
Okay, that's all we have for you today. And thanks for being here. Committee, there's no one else here to testify for this bill. There are no opponents. There are several written proponents and no neutral, no opponents, as far as I can tell. I'm sure that we might get 1 or 2 stragglers that come in, but with that, I'm going to close the hearing on this bill. And thanks so much, committee, for your due diligence today. I think we all asked some really good questions, and we've got our work cut out for us on this bill. We're adjourned until